My name is Dr. Aris Thorne, and for 10 years my life was a beautiful, chaotic symphony of ambition and camaraderie. I was the scientific heart and unyielding soul of Omnivax, the biotech startup I founded not just with colleagues, but with my husband, Julian, and our best friend, Ben. We were the golden trio, the unbeatable team. I was the architect, the one who saw the biological pathways in my dreams, the one whose hands were permanently stained with reagents, and whose mind was constantly whirring with equations. Julian was our brilliant frontman, a man whose charm could disarm the most skeptical investor and whose speeches felt like a call to arms. And Ben, dear, quiet Ben, was our research lead, a man of immense, meticulous talent who preferred the silence of the lab to the noise of the boardroom. Together, we were building a miracle. The Aegis project, a universal vaccine platform. It was my life's work, my magnum opus. The late nights that bled into days, the missed family holidays, the quiet concern in my mother's voice when I'd cancel another visit. I sacrificed it all on the altar of Aegis, believing our shared dream was worth any personal cost. The breakthrough came on a stormy October night. The lab was empty except for me. For 72 hours straight, I had been chasing a solution to the final stability equation, a problem that had stumped the entire field for a decade. And then at 3:17 a.m., as rain lashed against the windows, the data on my screen crystallized into perfect, undeniable clarity. I had done it. The solution was elegant, robust, and breathtakingly simple. In my sleep-deprived, euphoric state, I made a catastrophic error of trust. I bypassed the formal, time-stamped internal logging system and sent the complete, raw data file directly to Julian and Ben with the subject line. We did it. The key is found. I wanted them to share in that pristine, unvarnished moment of victory. I trusted them with the naked blueprint of my genius. 2 weeks later, I was summoned to the main boardroom. I walked in, expecting champagne and tears of joy, ready to finally formalize our patent strategy. Instead, I was met with a wall of cold, averted gazes from our investors. Julian stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, but he wasn't the man I married. His posture was rigid, his face a mask of corporate sorrow. He began to speak in a calm, measured tone that felt more violent than any shout. He spoke of escalating concerns about my leadership style, my perfectionism bordering on obstruction, and my increasingly volatile emotional state. I was stunned into silence, my mind reeling. And then Ben stood up. My friend, the man I'd brought soup when he was sick, the one I'd defended against unfair criticism. He couldn't meet my eyes. He clicked a presentation remote, and on the giant screen, he displayed a manipulated version of my data. He claimed in a trembling voice that I had been misinterpreting the results for months, that the stability was a mirage, and that he had been working in the background, quietly and heroically, to correct my fatal errors. He presented fabricated lab logs, doctored to show him working on the true solution for months. My original file, the one I had sent them, had been wiped from the primary server. Julian looked at me, his eyes empty, and delivered the killing blow. Aris, for the good of the company, for the millions of patients waiting for this cure, the board has decided it's time for you to take an extended sabbatical. They voted me out of my own company. My shares were forcibly bought back at a fraction of their value, a valuation calculated by deliberately excluding the success of Aegis. The betrayal was so absolute, so chillingly executed, that it didn't feel like a fire. It felt like the air had been sucked from the universe, leaving me in a silent, sterile vacuum. I walked out of that building, my life's work stolen by the two people I would have trusted with my life, and I made a silent vow. I would not break. I would not scream. I would become a ghost in their machine, and I would ensure their own greed and arrogance became the instruments of their total and utter destruction. The months that followed my execution were a desolate landscape. The grief was a physical weight, a leaden cloak I wore every day. The rage was a silent scream that echoed in my skull. But slowly, methodically, I began to transmute that pain into power. They had stolen my data, but they could never steal the intricate, living map of Aegis that existed in my mind. They had my finished blueprint, but they lacked the deep, intuitive understanding of its creator. You see, in my final feverish push for the solution, I had discovered something else, a ghost in the machine. A subtle, almost elegant flaw. Under a very specific and non-standard set of conditions during large-scale manufacturing. A particular combination of temperature fluctuation and pH variance. A critical protein in the vaccine would misfold. Not enough to be detected by their standard quality controls. It would pass every test. It would look perfect in the vial. But once administered, its protective efficacy would decay, dwindling to almost nothing within a year. It was a silent failure, a medical time bomb. My revenge would not be a messy, emotional lawsuit. It would be a quiet, scientific inevitability. I would force the truth to reveal itself, and in doing so, reveal them as the fools and frauds they were. I disappeared. I used the pittance from my buyout to rent a small, secluded house in a town nobody had ever heard of. In the detached garage, I built a new lab, a secret sanctuary I funded through a labyrinth of shell companies, the primary one named Sybil LLC. After the oracle who spoke truths no one would believe. My plan was a patient, two-pronged assault. First, I would become their most perceptive and troubling phantom. Using layers of digital security, a reliable VPN, and a carefully constructed persona, I created Dr. Klaus Richter, a reclusive, notoriously brilliant German biochemist. As Richter, I began publishing a series of dense, theoretical papers on niche scientific forums. These papers were works of artful misdirection. They discussed hypothetical stability issues in complex protein-based therapeutics, but woven into the arcane language and fabricated references was a precise, detailed roadmap pointing directly to the hidden flaw in the Aegis platform. I was sowing seeds of doubt, building a foundation of academic concern that would later give my devastating revelation the ring of established prophecy, not bitter revenge. The second phase was more dangerous. I needed physical proof. I needed a sample from their first major production batch. Using the Dr. Richter persona, I crafted an approach to a mid-level quality assurance manager at OmniVax. I offered a generous, independent consultancy fee for a blind analysis of their product, claiming to represent a potential European partner who required confidential, third-party verification. The manager, tempted by the easy money and seeing no risk in an external safety check, agreed. A single unmarked vial of the Aegis vaccine was smuggled out and mailed to a P.O. box I'd rented under another name. The day it arrived, my hands trembled as I held it. In the sterile silence of my garage lab, I ran the tests. I recreated the exact manufacturing conditions I knew their cost-cutting, scaled-up process would inadvertently produce. And there it was, glowing on my chromatograph, clear as day, the misfolded protein. The fatal flaw. They had raced to production, blinded by profit and hubris, and had missed the subtlety I had baked into my own design. They were manufacturing a masterpiece of deception, a billion-dollar monument to their own theft. I now had the irrefutable evidence. The ghost now held the murder weapon. I documented everything with forensic precision. The aberrant protein, the graphs showing plummeting efficacy in cell cultures, the entire trail. The trap was now set, its jaws open wide. All I had to do was wait for them to march into it, trumpets blaring, on their way to the bank. The crescendo of their hubris arrived 8 months later. OmniVax was a global sensation. Julian and Ben were on the covers of Time and Forbes, hailed as the saviors of modern medicine. Their faces were everywhere, beaming with triumphant smiles. They secured a historic, multi-billion-dollar global distribution deal with a World Health Body, and were just 72 hours away from the most anticipated initial public offering in the history of biotechnology. The world was not just watching, it was investing both financially and emotionally in their story. That was the moment I chose to detonate my bomb. From the quiet of my home, I uploaded my complete, unredacted findings to a major international pre-publication scientific server. The paper was published under my real name, in bold, undeniable type, Dr. Aris Thorne. The title was a clinical slap. A critical and fatal instability in the OmniVax Aegis platform, a post-hoc analysis by its original architect. It was not an opinion piece, it was a scientific obituary. The paper laid bare the flaw, presented the damning data from their own production batch, and included sophisticated mathematical models predicting the vaccine's failure. Crucially, it also featured a detailed timeline, proving my initial discovery predated Ben's alleged breakthrough, supported by forensic metadata I had recovered from old private backup drives, a contingency they never knew I had. The fallout was swift, brutal, and comprehensive. The scientific community went into an uproar. Journalists who had penned glowing profiles days before now scrambled to publish exposes with headlines like "Miracle Cure or Manufactured Lie?" and "The House of Cards at OmniVax." The global distribution deal was frozen indefinitely. The IPO was canceled minutes before the bell was to ring. The company's stock and that of its parent corporation went into freefall, wiping out hundreds of millions in market value in a single afternoon. I watched the financial news networks from my small, quiet kitchen, the chaos on the screen a stark contrast to the profound peace that had settled in my heart. Julian and Ben were forced to hold an emergency press conference. They looked haggard, shadows of the confident men from the magazine covers. They tried to play the victim, labeling me a bitter, dismissed founder on a crusade of vengeance. But their words were hollow, washed away by the tide of cold, hard, reproducible data I had released. Their own board of directors, terrified of the legal tsunami approaching, turned on them immediately. An internal investigation was launched, and it quickly uncovered the doctored logs, the deleted files, and the intricate web of lies they had spun. Julian was ousted as CEO before the week was out. Ben was fired and his scientific credentials were publicly eviscerated. His career was over. A week later, a thick envelope arrived from a prestigious law firm representing the OmniVax board. It was not a threat, it was a surrender. It contained an offer for a monumental, confidential financial settlement, the full reinstatement of all my patents, and a legally binding public statement acknowledging me as the sole, original inventor of the Aegis project. All in exchange for my cooperation in helping them salvage the platform, to fix the flaw I had discovered, and an agreement to forego any further legal action against the company. I took the deal. Not for the money, though it was substantial. I took it for the victory. I had not merely beaten them. I had proven, in the most public and humiliating way possible, that my intellect, the very thing they had tried to erase and claim as their own, was the only thing of genuine value in their entire fraudulent enterprise. I had used the immutable truth as my only weapon, and in the end, it was the only thing left standing. They had tried to bury me, not realizing I was a seed. And from the deep, fertile darkness of their betrayal, I grew back stronger, wiser, unshackled, and finally completely and gloriously free. What would you have done when you saw the flaw in your own design? Would you have exposed it immediately or waited for their downfall like I did? Was taking the settlement and walking away the ultimate power move, or should I have pursued total legal annihilation? Have you ever had a situation where patience and strategy proved more powerful than a direct confrontation? Share your own stories of quiet victory and the lessons you learned in the comments below.